Now, while the Israelis warned that their military operation in Gaza could take months until it can wipe out Hamas, much of the rest of the world is trying to work out what the long-term prospects for the region and its players could be. One suggestion that has come from a Saudi Arabian think tank is a plan to transfer the leadership of the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas to the Algerian capital, Algiers. I'm joined in the studio by the journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani. Good afternoon, Nabila. Thank you for coming into Monocle Radio. So could you just outline what is the plan?
Well, I have to say that this is a very convoluted and rather unlikely peace plan for the Hamas-Israeli conflict. It's actually a plan that was hatched in Saudi Arabia to transfer key Hamas leaders to Algiers, the capital of Algeria. And the secret plan was drafted following a discussion between Abdelaziz Al-Sager, who is the head of a Saudi think tank, the Gulf Research Center, and Anne Griot, who is the director of the North African and Middle East department at the French Foreign Ministry. The two of them met on November the 19th in Riyadh, the Saudi capital, and followed a report authored by Al-Sager. Now, as with many complex and highly secretive plans, it was evidently leaked to Le Monde, a newspaper in Paris. And I think it perhaps highlights that the instigators of the plan actually realize that it has no chance of success, and they want the world to know about it anyway. But Le Monde suggests that the evacuation of Hamas leaders to Algeria would be helpful because Algeria has a good relationship with both Qatar and indeed Iran, which are the main supporters of the Hamas movement, and because of Algeria's security capabilities that would allow it to tightly control their activities. I actually think that having Hamas in Algeria would cause all kinds of security problems for Algeria, and ones they would rather avoid, and that's why the Algerian ambassador to Paris, for example, remained quite silent on the issue. But I think more generally, Algeria went through a savage colonial experience at the hands of the French for 132 years, right up until 1962. And there are legitimate comparisons with the Palestinian experience. So the empathy with the Palestinians is certainly there.
It's difficult, though, because one wonders what exactly Hamas would do, because Hamas are one group's Palestinian resistance movement, but in the eyes of dozens of other countries, they are a terror group, and Israel is doing its best to wipe it out.
Yes, I think that the plan suggests that the Hamas leadership, and it most likely refers to the leader of the Ezzedine Al-Qassam Brigade, leader Mohammed Diaf, who is the leader of the military wing of Hamas, and the political leader of the movement in the Gaza Strip, Yahya Sinwar. And it's not a strategy that's quite novel, in fact. The idea echoes a historical incident in 1982 when Yasser Arafat, the head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, and his Palestinian fighters were evacuated from the Lebanese capital, Beirut, which was then besieged by the Israeli army, and they were sent to Athens and eventually to Tunis in Tunisia under French naval escort. There's another aspect to the plan, and perhaps a more effective one, in that the plan also calls for the deployment of an Arab peacekeeping force in Gaza under UN auspices and the establishment of what they call the Joint Transitional Council, including the main factions in Gaza, that is to say Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Fatah. And the council would be responsible for managing the enclave for a period of 4 years and for organizing presidential and parliamentary elections. And I actually think all of this sounds quite sensible and would at least be a move in the right direction. And it would certainly be better than Israel continuing to kill thousands of people while flattening the whole of Gaza and indeed provocatively placing their flags all over the enclave. As if they were prepared to occupy it again permanently, as they're currently doing illegally in the West Bank.
What would be the long-term prospects for Hamas, though, in that context, given the fact that Hamas would effectively be exiled to Algeria? But would they, from that position, be able to regroup their desire to fulfil their aims and to make sure that to do what they need to do. Their desire to create, to make sure that the Palestinians are kept out, are released from the Israeli sanctions and the Israeli control. That desire is not going to go away, though, is it?
No, absolutely. I think that's why, Le Monde noted that it was a very unclear plan, and it was also not clear whether the Saudi authorities had approved of the plan, or whether it was a purely personal initiative by the director of that Gulf Research Center in Riyadh. And the document only stated, and I quote, "It appears that the search for a Saudi-French consensus could contribute to the crystallization of a common vision acceptable to all parties and have an impact on the decision to the end of the war." So this is, dare I say, waffle in effect. And I think...
Where does this leave Algeria? Because it further divides, or it creates division within the region, doesn't it?
Well, I think, one has to look at the broader picture in all this. I think Israel has made it abundantly clear that it wants to keep up the killing indefinitely, and that there is no possibility of this resolving this situation. And dare I say, I think a permanent ceasefire is required. Not a permanent war. And the best way to achieve this ceasefire is through a broader global effort to include the Western powers, including, and dare I say, especially the United States of America. There is a strong argument that they need to stop mindlessly fueling death and destruction through pouring weapons and cash into the Israeli war machines. And I think mindsets are slowly changing. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, for example, has just said that the killing cannot go on. And even Joe Biden might slowly be waking up to what is happening.
What about France's involvement in this one? You mentioned Emmanuel Macron there, making that call for what is happening in Gaza to cease, given the level of humanitarian catastrophe that's being created there. But in terms of the way that France now goes and asks questions and goes and tries to get involved in places that other countries fear to tread. I mean, one thinks of the conversations that Macron had with Vladimir Putin before the invasion of Ukraine. The fact that France still wants to get involved in this part of the world, the Franco-Algerian relationship post-colonial is not healthy. It is, it is inevitably going to have some areas of tension. How welcome is this going to be?
I think at this stage, any effort to bring an end to what is essentially a carnage, it has to be welcomed. And yes, France's position has been ambivalent. On the one hand, Macron has showed unconditional support for Israel. And on the other hand, he was one of the first, if not the first, Western leader to call for a ceasefire, for the end of the killing of the elderly, women and children. He came close to calling it a genocide, but didn't. But as always with Macron, he wants to play a key part in sorting out world affairs. We've seen how he went back and forth to have these endless talks with Putin before the invasion of the Ukraine, but he failed miserably. And dare I say, this is another example of him not being terribly successful. And his attitude at home is also quite ambivalent. By regularly banning pro-Palestinian marches, for example, he's also sending a contradictory message.
Nabila Ramdani, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio.